All right, guys. It is 12:19, and this will resume the meeting of the Dallas Park and Recreation Board on Thursday, August 2nd. To someone, Ms. Williams' points earlier, I was just making a suggestion on how you can phrase what order you do your questions. Obviously, everyone is free to answer whatever question they have. We're going to go in rounds, and we'll do 3 minutes, but unlimited rounds so that we can get through as much as possible. One thing I will tell the folks on the other side of the horseshoe, since you don't know how many times you've done this, but when possible, try to just keep your questions, your answers brief and accurate as possible so that the park board member can ask you follow-ups if necessary. That way we can get through as many questions as possible. They will generally always ask you if they want to know more information. Going with Mr. Schlosser first.
Hi, good afternoon. First, thanks to the entire group for an outstanding both proposal and an outstanding...
Sorry. Two things. Back to the microphones. I'm not going with Mr. Schlosser because he's first over there. I'm going with him because he's first on my screen. When you press your button to speak, you will then show up on my screen in an order, so I'm going to go by that order. Secondly, when you press your button to speak, your mic is live. It will remain live until you unpress your button. So if you don't want everyone to hear what you're saying while you're waiting to speak, push your microphone away. Speak. The one that says speak. Once you press speak, you're on the list. Once you're done speaking, you press it. It'll be on. That's what I'm trying to say. Your mic is live. Yeah. So as long as your red speak button is on, then you're on my list. But your mic is also live. If this top part is red, it means it's live. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Mr. Schlosser, go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to ask my questions collectively just so that we can be efficient and then let whoever the right person, Ryan, the folks from Spectra, et cetera, speak. So here they come. In no particular order. Can someone clarify?
Mr. Schlosser, I don't want you to ask 5 questions. You only have 3 minutes. So if you could just...
I'm going to ask 5 questions in less than 3 minutes.
But they're not going to be able to answer in 3 minutes. So you're just going to have to...
Bobby, we've never asked our respondents to also answer within the same 5 minutes.
I know, but if you did one question at a time, I think we could get through more questions.
Okay, I'll condense it some. I can't condense it to one unless it'll be one long question. A clarity on the role of or the relationship between In the City for Good and the new entity. How can you run Fair Park on an expense structure that is dramatically below what the park department is spending today? It looks like the expenses are, if I do my math right, something like 40% of current expense. Doesn't make sense. Third is, what's going to propel the very ambitious fundraising effort that Valletta described? And those are my 3. I'll stop at those 3.
Okay, so I will take a stab at the first piece, and then maybe these guys can jump in on the second piece. Regarding the expense budget, first I'll say that these proposals were based upon the 15-16 budget year, of which there was a $10.5 million budget. All right, so that was the baseline. What happened this fiscal year...
Ryan, sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but... They're here.
Yeah,
we've never been allowed to talk to them.
Okay.
This is the first time.
Yes.
We can talk to you whenever we want. Let them answer the questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, Peter Zingoni with Spectra, just to confirm. So the line item expensive, I'm going to have David Leibowitz from our Vice President of Finance just support kind of the role of the methodology, so everyone's understanding of kind of where we came from based off the numbers, as Ryan was beginning to describe. The financial information that was provided was off of the 15-16 baseline year. Right. So with that being said, I will allow David to kind of speak a little bit behind the methodology and the assumptions that we took into consideration to make that numeric.
But just so that we are respectful of your time and the board's time, my question is very stealth, which is somehow it looks like more than $5 million of expense that the city has on its historical expense budget for operating Fair Park has dropped. How can you do it for that much less?
Let me go down the road of where Ryan was going and where Pete started. So real quick, when we went back and we went through the process as Ryan started, we were given financial information that was from the 15-16 fiscal year. In that year, the park operated, right, so an operating basis at $10.5 million in expense. our pro forma on the operating expenses are projecting $11.3 million.
Okay, but
If you look at the line items of expense, not the net bottom line, when you factor in the revenues that we are projecting over and above the historical. So if you look at CR $11.9 million, that's 11.3 of operating
Got it.
expenses.
So the expenses are not dramatically lower. How can you achieve a $3 million savings? But what is dramatic, so one is the $3 million savings in expenses, and the other is the doubling of revenues.
The increase of revenues, which were in big buckets, just to hit it to you, $3 million of fundraising, $600,000 of corporate sponsorship and advertising, there's 3.6, and the rest is just from incremental event activity, growing the events that are there now so that we can generate more revenues from call it the same store book of business.
Sure. Yep.
So we've captured it down.
And how the reduction in expenses?
Well,
That's pretty dramatic. I mean, on a percentage basis, that's about 25.
but it's not dramatic compared to. So what we did is we went through a process with the city of normalizing the budget, so that we made sure that what was included in operating expenses were truly operating expenses. Because in future years, past 15, 16, there were some capital expenditures that were put into operating.
Got it.
So we've identified those with the help of the city to reduce out what wouldn't be recurring expense.
Got it.
Then we normalized the budget. Then we went through, our presentation. I'm sort of the quarterback of the pro forma.
Sure.
So we use all of the people that you see in the room today, and we went through and we dug through each and every line item of expense
Okay.
with the help of the city, and to come to what sort of, remember, we operate many facilities
there's
all
some
over,
economies
so
of
we're
scale.
using comparable data.
Right. And you're saying that the nonprofit is going to raise $3 million. I'm looking at you, Valletta. $3 million for operating purposes, because as we all know, donors prefer to give to capital, to buildings, to bricks, to naming, as opposed to covering the cost of electricity. But you're saying we're going to raise $3 million in operating funds?
Mr. Schlosser, first, Clyde Warren Park, and we said this in the interviews, raised 52.5 over a few-year period. It's tremendous board.
Mostly capital.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
And there were a lot of misses there for odd reasons that I won't go into. So we said this, in a way, is a more sympathetic cause from my history of looking at. Nobody understood what in the world it meant to cap a highway. People had been tapped out and given huge contributions to the Performing Arts Center and the like.
Right.
So I was one of the ones on our team who said there's some reason for optimism that $3 million a year is not a crazy number. On the issue of operating versus capital, it's not so much that dichotomy. It's, in my view, it's contributions for program that are not viewed as just filling holes in budgets,
Okay.
but instead somebody gives money, and if the board is willing, the area or the program is named for them, and obviously it has to comply with rules about what kind of product or what kind of person.
So the Smith family decides to sponsor the yoga in the Fair Park, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So that's not really viewed as just filling
Right,
a
I
gap in a
understand. It's
budget.
not electricity.
But it's not capital.
Got
It's
it.
somewhere in between.
Okay, it's sponsored programming, but
Yep.
sponsored by philanthropists as opposed to corporations, or perhaps both.
And we're doing it. Bank of America, Emily is the comparable person, Dallas, who does this in New York. The Bank of America executive, who's just like Emily, is putting close to $4 million into programs that are linked to Bank of America and tremendously useful for the park. And it makes up $4 million out of $22 million Bryant Park budget. So
So
it's
that
a
$3
big-
million is really, you call it donations, it could be a significant component could be paid sponsorships for the purposes of branding.
Exactly right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schlosser. And that was about 6 minutes, and I think it went well. So I think we'll give everyone else 6 minutes as well.
Can they answer
so-
the board question? Because there's a change from the October proposal to what's presented today in terms of one organization was the original pitch, and now it's a different.
We're going to have multiple rounds. I want to
Okay.
get to as many people as possible. Okay, I've got Ms. Rader, then Ms. Williams, then Mr. Blair.
Thank you very
Ms.
much.
Rader.
I'm not sure if this goes to the not-for-profit or to Spectra, so forgive me. I'm sorry. I'm very excited to see transparency, so thank you for whoever said yay to that. I think that is a huge benchmark for us moving forward. Thank you very much. A question, we talk about the aggressive MWBE program, which I'm thrilled about. You're committed to an intern program. You're committed to, where's my other one? Minority businesses in the area. You're committed to procurement and contract opportunities with them, recruitment and hiring, internship, I think I already said, and the local partner and not-for-profits around the park. When? And I asked Ryan this, but I wanted everybody to hear this. So when will this all occur? Because this is really important. And then I have one more question after that.
I'll take a first stab at that.
Okay.
It's going to occur once we receive city council approval. We're going to actually start activating, because it's now moving forward. We're going to start having some of those conversations, but we can't officially begin any true contract activities until we have approval from city council.
Okay, so it's going to be like instantaneous.
We're going to start immediately. We're already starting to have some of those conversations, but we won't actually activate some of those activities until the contract's been approved by city council.
Okay, great. My next question, and still I don't know who it goes to, so sorry, but the Parks Department has a fabulous team at Fair Park, and I want to make sure they have the opportunity, if they so choose, to seek employment with you, because they have the history, they have the knowledge, they have, I don't know how many years of experience out there. They know all the nooks and crannies. They know where all the great things are and where the not so great things are out there. So what is your commitment to hiring existing staff?
I think it's a terrific question, and it's a huge point as part of our Spectra's initiative. And for every single point that you've just described, the reasons why we're going to do it is the reasons why. We are committed to interviewing each and every employee and offer them all opportunities. I think it's going to take some time to understand the roles and responsibilities they're currently serving and seeing how it fits and where their skill set fits into somewhat of an updated model in our organizational structure within the Spectra. But we are committed to interviewing and hiring each and every employee that are out there.
That's fabulous news. And I will end with this. I did not see any expertise amongst the ginormous amount of expertise you all have between you of anyone from museums or education. And that's a huge component at Fair Park.
Mm-hmm.
As we talked about earlier, we're looking to expand the board. We wanted to get through this process, and we wanted to look at some specific activities and skill sets as we go forward.
Okay, good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rader. Ms. Williams.
Good afternoon. I just have one question for Spectrum. I did my homework, so there's no doubt that y'all have a proven track record. I know, Mr. Sullivan, you were just named the general manager, so will you resign if this go through and come over here, or will you have a dual role?
I would be coming back to the United States and to follow Darren's comments if and when this proposal is approved by the Park Board as well as City Council. I'll be coming back.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, and living locally.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to dive into the board and transparency, because when you talk about transparency, and I'm going to say I've been on this board since 2014, so I think and I don't take it personally, because we was appointed by the council member to represent the constituents in our district and as a whole. So I've been here for a while to hear about transparency, so it's not for you, Spectrum. It's not for you, Mr. Biederman. I'm going to dive into the board. I just want to know, when did you all put the board together? What month, year, when did y'all get your board together? Because it was a hidden secret. So when did y'all get your board together?
The board started coming together in, where are we in, August? Yeah, it's been within the last couple of months.
Okay. And There was an article, and Mr. Wolosky wrote in December 2016, and I'm paraphrasing, an unknown third group, unnamed. So were you all that third group? They mentioned the president for City for Good. When we talk about transparency, I understand y'all, I don't know at what point y'all could or could not have meetings with the community, but when you come with a product, I'm reluctant when I hear something unnamed. And I'm going to be very honest and transparent. As an African American, I hear this all the time, that they, and I'm not going to quote what we hear because we have guests, are not being transparent. They want to take over. So I'm going to be myself and extremely hard when I see people who look like me. And I just want to know, at what point did you all realize that you should have been more transparent?
That's a good question, but let me take it a couple of steps. I was part of the original design package of the team. I was not part of the original board. As we started to look at the way to resolve and respond to the RFQ, the board evolved at that point. There was never in my mind, there was never an unnamed group that was out there working.
It was okay, you're on my time, so I just want to finish my question with you. Okay, it was in the Dallas Morning News, and I can post that article. Did you all go to the community? Who's going to be doing the community? Is it in the City for Good? Who will be responsible for going out to the community? Because I'm trying to put the pieces together.
In the City for Good is contracted to go out into the community.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm going to say this on the behalf because I was asked, Ms. Anna Hill couldn't be here, and I did after we find out who was the board members. Have y'all reached out to them? And I've been in my neighborhood for 47 years, and I'm the president now of our association. And when they built the horse park in the Byron Nelson, they didn't wait to get us involved after the contract. After this. They came to the table in the beginning. And I'm just going to go on record and say I find it very, very insulting that no one took time, because we hear this all the time. You got to keep the South Dallas community involved. You got to keep them involved. And these are our guests. They're not from South Dallas. So I'm not going to say it's their responsibility. I'm going to say, Mr. Darren, it is your responsibility. You are the head who's going to leave Fair Park first. And I did go back because I didn't want to hear rumors. So I called some of those leaders, and I asked them, and they told me they got a call afterwards to attend a meeting August the 1st. They declined, and the meeting was canceled. So when you talk about the community and we talk about the Fair Park, and I think I'm one of the original ones that been here when they talk about this, I've heard so many blacks come to these meetings and talk about that community. But then when I see somebody at the head who looks like me, and they haven't did that, and I'm just hoping that y'all can get it straight. But I'm going to be honest. If the Mayor Rollins and the Horse Park and the Byron Nelson Salesmanship Club had did us like this, it's already a bad taste. So how y'all going to move forward with that? And then my last question, do y'all have a clause about, I don't know what it's called, you have some people who was with one bidder, now they on your board. So do y'all have a clause that prevents that to after the contract has been awarded? Is it a clause? Because I think it's distasteful for me to be over here with this group, and then I jump on ship with you all before the contract. If it's awarded afterwards, I would have been at ease with it. So do y'all have a clause that forbids? Because, see, to me, I gave all my intel over here with this other person who was bidding. Now I'm on your board. So that didn't sit too well with me, so.
All right. Can I answer them in the order you asked?
Oh, go ahead, sir.
Okay, so the board as it's formed now was just within the last 2 months. And in that capacity, we were precluded from having community meetings as part of the process. Now that I'm sitting at the head, I'm not about being a figurehead. I'm not about not having community meetings. I'm about community engagement. You look at the projects that I've been involved in, Billy Dade, we had community meetings. South Oak Cliff, I had more than the contracted amount of community meetings. I had individual meetings. I had sidebar meetings at churches. I had meetings where we had breakfast and lunch. I've had dinner meetings. This is what I do. This is one of the reasons I want to be in this position, is to make sure the South Dallas voice was not ignored and wasn't part of the equation. So I'm standing here, or I'm sitting here right now telling you that going forward, there will be some transparency. There will be engagement. That's what I do. That's how I've been, and that's how I've been my whole life. So I can't tell you what happened prior to me becoming in this position, but I can tell you going forward that I'm going to make sure that I look like that look like you is going to make sure that our community is heard and is listened to.
Can you answer the second question?
Yes, ma'am. I'm about to. We do not have a provision in our agreement to preclude anybody that was part of another team. I'm in the professional services space. We do architecture, design, construction administration, and construction management. There's multiple times where there are multiple consultants that happen to be on multiple teams. In this instance, we didn't look at that as an issue. And in many instances, although they have that information, they don't typically share information that they have across those different party lines. It's just a matter of bad ethics. I understand your question, but we don't have a provision in our bylaws that prohibits that.
Mr. James, I think it would help everyone on the board, and Ms. Williams, if we haven't been provided with your nonprofit bylaws.
Okay.
So could we get a copy of the bylaws?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. That'll help answer a lot of questions, I think.
Yes, sir.
Okay, next up, Mr. Blair.
Firstly, thank everybody for coming down and presenting with us, presenting to us. I loved, well, like my colleague said, that you guys have already an established MWBE participation program. However, what I'm hoping to see is an opportunity for businesses to be created in South Dallas and Fair Park in that neighborhood. We have to have something there to make sure that the people who live there don't get priced out. And, you know, I love the idea of, you know, making sure they get hired and they get jobs, but who knows if they'll be able to afford to live in Fair Park after all these modifications. So that's one thing. And then also, I want to know if you guys have a plan in place for community involvement in the park or in Fair Park total once you guys start to put together events for year-round participation.
I'll take the first stab, and I'm sure there'll be some other individuals that want to chime in. We've had this conversation. We'll take the participation. As the chair of the Black Chamber, I'm always looking out for black businesses and not just black employment. So I'll be looking for business creation opportunities for established businesses or emerging businesses to participate, as well as mature businesses. But we'll also be looking to, as part of our internship program, as well as some of the other programs that we're going to establish, is some business incubators that have opportunities to participate across all sectors of the events, the programming, the sporting events, any of the things that are going to happen at the park. They have that participation. In regards to being priced out, the city's new housing policy kind of has an overlay around Fair Park, and part of those initiatives are going to be looking at the affordability matrix. So as property taxes increase, the property values increase, there's mechanisms to make sure that there's an affordability component to that. That is something that has just been released by Economic Development Department for the city. So there's going to be some conversations between Fair Park First, the Park Board, as well as Spectra as we go forward.
Mr. Blair, your mic is off. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have to have it for the public. Here, come speak in mine. Don't turn your mics off.
And Ryan, this question is for you. And this is an 80-page document for a contract. What protections are in there for the African American Museum in Fair Park, and what is our relationship as a board to the African American Museum now under this new structure?
So there is an existing contract with the African American Museum that runs through 2022, and this team before you has committed to honoring those contracts, working with those tenants to enhance their experience. So I just want to let you know there is an existing agreement that runs through 2022.
Just a small thing, Ryan. I know you worked really hard on this, but they're here now. I want to make sure they speak for themselves.
I will turn my mic
Because just so the public knows, we have, as a park board, have not been allowed to talk to these folks because of the procurement rules. We are only allowed to talk to them in open session. We can pick up the phone and talk to Ryan whenever we want. So, okay, I've got Mr. Slaughter and Mr. Kittner next.
Morning. First of all, there's no doubt in my mind on what a job Spectra could do. And I think it's needed. My problem is, and I'll address this to Mr. Bitterman. He made a statement earlier about this being an event park. I want to make sure that our partners out there, like the Music Hall, the Old Mill Lane, and of course the State Fair, which if not for the State Fair, it would probably be a desert. And the State Fair is a world-renowned operation. You know, people come from all over the world. And I don't want that stigma to be that the only thing that you guys can do is change this from an event park. And like I said, I totally agree. So I like to know what you plan to make sure those people are protected. And also the people that were out there that has towed the rope for so long, Daniel's group. Number two, it's sort of like a sibling rivalry. There's somebody on your board, James, that not only do I respect, but I consider him like an older brother, and I'll break his arm later. You know what I mean? Because I was shocked to see him on the board. Like I said, like Ms. Williams said, it was, you know, we didn't know what was going on. So I like to, Mr. Bitterman, to answer me that, because I didn't want to get that stigma because it was an event part, and now it's all of a sudden going to be a people's park. It's always been a people park because I want to make sure that I've had some calls from people from the Music Hall, Dallas Summer Musical, that, hey, are they going to have to move? Do we need to go down to the Majestic? I'm a product of the Fair Park. I went to H.S. Thompson, and my whole world was turned upside down when I got to visit the Music Hall because of the Dallas Summer Musical. I'm a product of the State Fair. And I don't want the same thing to happen that we had here to the Cowboys. You know, when Jerry Jones took over the Cowboys, how he did Tom Landry, I want to make sure that those entities and those partners that we have out there is not done like that. And you can make me happy.
It's interesting, a press person asked me the same question you just did. How do you, if you feel the park being only an event park is a problem, how do you fix that? And the answer is it's all addition. So we're not talking about subtraction at the beginning for sure, because anybody who's doing anything good to draw people into their theater or whatever at Fair Park is doing a great thing for Fair Park. We're talking about adding activities, and a lot of this will be in the neighborhood park first, that fill the holes between events or things being done within the buildings, different days of the week. The aim would be, there's this cliche in my field, 24/7. 24/7 is ridiculous. There's nothing that's 24/7 in the world, including Las Vegas. It's really slows down at about 4 a.m. So we say something like 16/7. So it would be wonderful if there was Sunday morning when nothing else is going on in the park. There are fitness activities in the neighborhood park that people in the neighborhood can walk into and enjoy, and there's life in Fair Park as a result. So that's one time. We could be talking about 105-degree days in July when people would say it's too hot to do stuff outside, but we'll figure out some programming person who can fill what's now a parking lot with something that appeals to neighborhood residents plus regional residents. So it's really addition. It's a very good question you asked. There are people who said you can either have an event park or an everyday activity park. I think this park in Dallas is big enough that it can fill both needs, but nothing about bringing new activities in should be construed to threaten people who have been there for years, drawing people into their buildings.
I want to address your last question. We were precluded from having those conversations. So,
but you aren't now.
We are not now. We are not now.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Jenkins is telling me Now, the instructions for park board members to speak into their mics, because people who are watching on TV have said they can't hear the park board members online and on TV. So, okay, Mr. Kittner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all very much. This has been a very impressive and thorough presentation. I appreciate you all coming here and answering our questions. I've got quite a few, but I'll stick to just some operational questions for now. What types of things at Fair Park does Spectra anticipate could be subject to corporate sponsorships? I think in the presentation you all had indicated that you expected around $600,000 in corporate sponsorships in the first years. So are we talking about sponsoring events or buildings? Any additional detail on that would be much appreciated.
Sure, I can take the lead on that. So there's a wide range. I think one of the biggest feedbacks that we got was to increase the wayfind signage around Fair Park for directional access, where things go. We have a very strong number in our budget to identify some wayfind and sponsoring a lot of wayfind signage. In addition to that, there are a number of facilities that we have targeted that are not already named and are outside of the historical preservation side that we identified as potential sponsorship assets. And we'll continue that, whether it's subnaming right, where there's naming rights, subnaming rights, including box offices. We've had a very successful track record as well of naming parking lots, for instance, the Toyota parking lot, the Lincoln, so things along those lines. So we will get very creative and innovative of identifying those sponsorship assets.
Thank you. And what are some of y'all's ideas to use the buildings that are underutilized right now? Can you talk about that?
Sure, I can take the lead at that as well. I think they're part of our operational assessment when we get in and identify some of the challenges within. We want a part of the interview process with the existing staff and really truly understand what has worked and what has not worked in the past is something that we're all going to take into consideration when identifying the new types of events that we're going to bring. You saw the slides a little bit earlier of talking about some of the more concerts, a lot of the family shows. But we'd also like to get a little creative in doing our own event generation, our own event creation, whether it's different types of barbecue festivals or I know we have a very successful brew fest at the park. So we want to look to enhance and identify new creative ways that would help maximize the buildings, the empty spaces in Fair Park.
The proposal also had significant time spent on the signature concessions. Where do y'all plan to implement those? Is that something that y'all are doing full year round, or is that just to enhance the events? I was confused on where that would be implemented.
So the concessions piece of it is obviously in conjunction with a lot of the management of the food. So again, working with the concessionaires that are already out there, and again, working and identifying what new creative and innovative ways that we can bring to increase the points of sale at some of those facilities. Marketing is going to be a big piece to drive food and beverage revenue. We take a lot of pride in our not only marketing on the venue management side, but also on the food and beverage side, making sure that we're connecting with the fans and the customers that are entering into the facilities of offering new innovative specials that are going on, some concession stands, implementing some new food items. So we're going to work in conjunction with the local concessionaires that are there now, and just bringing some new innovative signature menu items as well as the marketing.
And I love the idea of bringing in some additional sporting events and other events. But one question I have is about the infrastructure. Where do you anticipate that those things will go? The arena is very old there. There's a football stadium, but indoor activities may not go there. Do you think the infrastructure is sufficient for the types of things that you all want to do? Or do you think that improvements will need to be made to accomplish that?
Yeah, I can take the start. And you can so I think to start, I think the Cotton Bowl has definitely some opportunities to bring in some of the larger sporting events, if you will. I also think we've been very successful, and Peter touched upon it earlier, of creating some of in the exhibition space, of creating some youth amateur sports as well, whether it's amateur volleyball tournaments, whether it's wrestling tournaments, really thinking outside the box of the new types of events that we create. So to answer your question, what venues, I think it's gonna be a combination of the Cotton Bowl. I think capitalizing on the automobile building, which is a column-free facility that we can do some new innovative events in. And I think the Coliseum, especially with the renovations that are recently getting completed, will lend the opportunity to introduce some new events as well. I don't know, Peter, if you had something extra.
Just to touch on that a little, I can just pull upon my own experiences in other facilities that I've managed. Again, I go back to my experience at University of Phoenix Stadium. No one really looked at amateur or youth sports for years. We didn't look at it there, and then we had an introspective moment, and there was a huge volleyball tournament in downtown Phoenix, and one of my event coordinators happened to be an ex-assistant coach at USC. And I asked him, do you know the guy that runs this big volleyball tournament downtown? And he looked at me and said, yes. And I shouldn't say this, I almost smacked him and said, you got to be kidding me. I said, why don't we go talk to him and see if he wants to move or do another women's amateur volleyball tournament, which had been taking place in the Phoenix Convention Center for 20 years, and see if he wants to come out west into Glendale. One thing led to another. We talked to him. We met. We ultimately created our own IP with him. We created a new tournament that's over President's Day weekend at the University of Phoenix Stadium, which now the floor of the University of Phoenix Stadium is filled with like 40 volleyball courts with people screaming and so on and so forth. But that's the process. It's really taking advantage of, local assets. Are there other opportunities in and around the city of Dallas or the region that might want to consider coming to Fair Park? Similarly, once that success took place, we ended up, and oh, by the way, that particular person that we partnered with, he owns it and the building owns it. He's based in Houston, and I will be calling him to see if he wants to do a women's volleyball tournament at Fair Park. Having said that, upon the success of that, we ultimately started a women's basketball tournament. It's a 3-on-3 basketball tournament, same thing. The floor of the University of Phoenix Stadium was filled with a bunch of courts and so on and so forth. Two, I think, prime examples of where we kind of look inward and we talk to the staff. I'm sure that, when the time comes and I can sit down and we can sit down with the staff, there's going to be a multitude of ideas of, hey, we can try this or we can try that. And quite honestly, I'm going to be, why haven't we? That won't matter. I mean, the fact of the matter is if it makes reasonable business sense, we're going to go after it. And even if it doesn't, we have the whole sponsorship arm on the side in an effort to help try to make it work financially. I mean, that's kind of the quick process on a lot of in-house produced events to maybe own it, and or same thing with community events. I mean, I have a long history in Lansing, Michigan. I was there. You heard me talk about that earlier, where the ballpark was primarily for baseball, but the mayor, when he built it, when the mayor and council approved it and we built it, I mean, the Lansing Lugnuts, it was Oldsmobile Park, the history of Oldsmobile and Lansing, of course. They made it very clear. They said, we don't just want minor league baseball. And this is a very successful team, a team that drew over 1 million people. It's a single-A team, 1 million people in 2 years. We ended up doing things like Halloween spectaculars, where we called it Fright Night, which was a commercial proposition. It was a 2-week Halloween spectacular in the park. We flooded the infield and we did skating. We did movie nights. We did concerts, which ultimately were very successful and then led into the Common Ground Music Festival that I talked about. So again, that's the process. We referenced earlier about festivals. We have very strong ties to folks nationally that produce festivals, and we've already talked to them in an effort to have them take a very hard look at Fair Park to see what else they can bring.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Okay, going on to Mr. Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. Excited about the opportunities to transform Fair Park into a year-round park that's available and open to the community. I'm going to juggle between pages 17 and, sorry, I lost my page. And where it has the current staff numbers, 50, 75 positions held. Don't know where that one is. So I'll start off by saying the operating expense, does that include your the staffing salaries?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And again, going off my colleague Rodney, I too am having a difficult time understanding how you guys will be as successful as we want you to be with pretty much the same budget that's running Fair Park today. Do those numbers work in your benefit with staffing because y'all are having staff do multiple jobs? Trying to really figure out. I know you mentioned that you guys would find sponsors for different activities, but I'm still trying to put my head around how almost the same amount of budget, and you guys are going to have a year-round Fair Park. How do you do that? How do you produce more events? How do you draw more people? How do you have more concerts? How do you have, any activity out there without really? Are we mismanaging our current budget? What's
Don't
what's
answer that. I'm kidding.
Maybe the easy way to answer that question is, well, there is a reason why you're hiring us, right? So let's go back again. So these numbers look like our operating expenses are going to drop off dramatically from, 17, 18. But again, we build our budget, and we build these budgets all the time. So there is a little bit of the trust me factor. You know who we are, what our experience is, how many different venues of this type. We built this budget sort of from $1. So with the help of purchasing, we dug into the financial information, and we looked at each and every line item of the operating expense. And we're a professional company. We do this all the time, all over the world, in fact. And we were able to identify expenses where we think we could achieve significant savings through operational programs that Mike puts in place with his group, with utility savings that we think with our partnership with Metco, there's little things that move the needle. We can buy insurance, for example, like liability insurance, not talking about health insurance, but liability insurance at a much lower rate than what the city buys today. All of those things start to accumulate to real savings from privatizing your facility.
Does that privatizing include a lot of subcontracting that's going to offset
there could
some
be.
of the...
Right, so there's subcontracts in place today. Those contracts, if I understand it correctly, are being assigned to us. It's not our goal to go in and eliminate subcontracts because we also have participation goals. We also want to employ local companies to work at the park. But at the same time, we have a duty based upon the contract that we have and the way our funding is going to work or the way the manager's funding is going to work. We have a duty to go in and look at each and every operating expense and find some belt tightening. Our job, and we do it in 150 municipalities all over the world, is to operate better than you can on your own. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business.
Okay. Page 42, Fair Park First Board of Directors. What's the commitment and what are the term limits for the current board members? Are they committed to be part of this organization for 2 years, a year, 3 years? And have they committed to that?
So the board term is 2 years. We have no term limits right now.
Okay. What's the commitment from the current board members to stick around for 2 years?
100%.
Thank you.
All right. There's no term limits, but they did pass out, thank you, that was quick. They passed out their bylaws to everyone, so. Yeah, there's no term limits. Okay. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you all for being here. Very much appreciate what y'all are here to do. I have several questions, and they may jump around a little bit, so please forgive me. I kind of wrote them down as they came to me, and I appreciate our having unlimited rounds for us to get these questions answered. The first question that I have is about year-round tenants. Is there going to be a way for you to, how are you going to deal with, is it your goal to have year-round tenants out at Fair Park? And if so, how are you going to handle that dealing with the state fair comes? We have lots of events going on. Are there certain facilities that you would like to see used year-round? That's a very important concern for some folks.
So as we mentioned, we will be committed to working with each and every tenant that are out there today and working on enhancing, obviously, their mission and the operation of their respective organization. As it relates to the State Fair, we're going to work very closely with the State Fair and are committing to doing so through, in its simplest form, communication. Having weekly meetings, bi-weekly meetings with all the tenants in the park, which I know is occurring as it stands today, but really trying to streamline and identify where we're going to add that those additional events around the events. We're going to try to enhance a scheduling process so we can focus on working with a lot of those existing tenants that are out there, understanding what types of events they have coming up and how we can build events and program events around those as well, including the State Fair.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I kind of did my chair down there a little bit low. Let me scooch up here. It also says here that, so looking at not the first year financials, but on page 18, the 10-year financial comparison, you have, as far as operating expenses go, you've underbid the other two applicants by $50 and $60 million. You said that some of that was by a reduction in capital expenditures. Is the majority of it a reduction of capital expenditures, or is it savings? How are you able to so significantly undercut these folks by tens of millions of dollars?
You may want to just come take that seat next to Ryan. You don't have to. I'm just saying it might be easier.
It's okay. I can't speak specifically to the other bidders. We didn't have insight into those numbers. What I can say about those other bids is they're not experienced operators like we are. So I have a lot more confidence in our numbers per se than what I see on the face from our competition. So that,
okay.
Enough said on that.
Thank you for that.
If you look at, so a lot of the operating expenses in these buildings are recurring, right? So there's big, again, I'll get to those sort of big buckets, right? Staffing expense is a very large portion of the operating expense of any facility. So we are able to control that expense because we have sort of a starting point and we've got policies in place, and now we have a 10-year budget to stick to that we know, kind of what the increases are going to be over a period of time. So while their expenses were accelerating probably at a much higher rate than ours typically do, again, based on our experience at other facilities, we know what we can control. So we have a very high degree of expertise and the ability to, exert a lot of control over the big expenses.
And so, as from what you said,
so what was happening? I'm sorry. What was happening is probably ours were going on a flatter rate, where theirs were potentially accelerating. So at some point, we crossed, and then the delta, the gap between them, started to grow.
And is that because you're going to be paying your employees less than what they're being paid now?
No.
Okay.
No.
I know that there's a floor of $10. Around $10 is what I saw in the
$10.94.
$10.94. So for 20 years, and that doesn't. So that doesn't escalate. Okay. So that's if we're going to save all this money out at Fair Park by simply not paying employees, that is a little bit of a concern that I have. Now, Ryan, could you tell me because the point I'm trying to make is, if you've underbid these others by $50 or $60 million by underpaying employees or by not paying capital expenditures, not taking those capital expenditures into your budget, where do all those capital expenditures go?
So
then who pays for them?
Well,
because
the one thing Mike can address the capital.
Okay.
Let me just address the staffing piece. If you look at the actual final year-end staffing expense from Fair Park from 15-16, which was our basis, we've absorbed within our number that entire budget with an increase. We're basically saying we're going to run the park at the same level of personnel expense. So what does that, so what you hear, right, where we're going to give everybody an opportunity, we're going to interview everybody, that we're already budgeting to take on everybody who's working at the park today at similar level of salary.
So where does your savings come from?
Well, again, I can't necessarily address where our savings is coming from relative to the other bidders because I don't know what they have in their numbers. So I'm not trying to skirt, but what I can tell you is I know our numbers and I know what our increases are. I know what our historical cost control measures are and what our historical trends are at venues that we operate in, similar size markets and things like that give us a lot of comfort that we can control operating expense. The other element of our deal is if we are good enough to create an excess, we get to reserve that money, or the manager gets to reserve savings, which will help us in future years. So again, if we hit the numbers and do better than the numbers that we project in our 10-year budget, then we should be able to start to reserve monies as well, which will help in the future in the event, the unlikely event, that expenses maybe start to jump up.
And what do you mean by help in future years?
Well, because when we get
So you have that reserve money and that helps. How does that help?
Well, because we get to reserve it and use it in future years in the event that we need it.
But also that reserve money, if I'm not mistaken, can also be spent at Fair Park on capital expenditures. And so who's it helping, you or Fair Park?
Well, at the end of the day, Spectra, as the manager for the not-for-profit, we get paid management fees. So if there's excess money, the whole intent here is to reinvest it some way, somehow, back into the park. We don't profit in any way. It doesn't benefit Spectra other than being able to better operate the park and to continue to have the funding that we need without going back to the city and asking for more money. It's a mechanism, it's a self-fulfilling mechanism to help us over the long term.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Ms. Barbie. Really quick, because I'm trying to get to everyone.
Did the question regarding capital get answered?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
quick answer.
Again, not knowing what's in their numbers, whether they're absorbing capital within their operating expenses. Our operating expenses are exactly that, operating expenses. They don't include capital. We've taken note of the previous studies done identifying capital. We've made that known to the city in our response that we still see major capital money needing to be reinvested back in.
How much? What's the dollar amount?
I think the AECOM report was like $250 million over the life.
What did you project? Sorry.
I think we were right around that same amount.
How much?
Around $250 million over the life. Again, a portion that can be addressed internally through fundraising, matching dollars, so hopefully that request won't be $250 million over the life of the project, but there's definitely going to be money needed both from our own private fundraising and from the city for long-term capital.
So you think that study is relatively accurate?
From my review, it hit on all the key points. As we talked about, we'll come in and do our own assessment with that report and develop a new capital plan.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Barbie.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you very much for the explanations that you've given us today. I'm absolutely thrilled that a company such as yours with international recognition, organization, and contacts is interested in coming to help us at Fair Park, because Fair Park is a central necessity for our city, and it has been really neglected for a long time. So the job that you're going to undertake is not going to be easy, and it sure as hell not going to be cheap. So thank you very much. This means a lot to me because I, like many members of this park board, grew up in Fair Park, and this is very important. I'm particularly pleased at your attention to the neighborhood, because whatever anybody tries to do at Fair Park is not going to be successful until the problems in the surrounding neighborhood are addressed. Employment, development of reasonable housing. This is something that's going to have to be addressed because there are many vacant lots in that area. There's a land bank. Maybe somehow somebody can use contacts to get some of that land bank land developed into reasonably affordable housing. But that's not really what I'm thinking about. In your contract, you say that you all are going to pay a living wage of $10.94 per hour. I assume that's the lowest rank in the employee. But it says for the term in the contract. Does that mean for 10 years with no raises? I'm concerned about that because, quite frankly, I don't think $10.94 is a living wage. Our rental properties now are going all over the city of Dallas for between $1,000 and $1,500 a month. And for somebody earning $10.94 an hour, that's totally out of reach. So we have several problems that need to be addressed. If it is for the 10-year term, I think that needs to be readdressed because we're going to have inflation. There's no way we're going to escape that. And it's essential for the people that live in the neighborhood to at least profit somehow from this new approach to Fair Park. They need to have jobs. I think your emphasis on traineeship is a wonderful idea because the young people, all you have to do is drive down the streets around the neighborhood. What do you see? You see a lot of young people and you see a lot of mature men standing around on the street corners in the middle of the day, which means they don't have jobs. So we need for this to help not only the buildings in Fair Park that are historic, we need for that to help the neighborhood. So how about it?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think there's a few questions. And I also want to come back to, and I can't really see his name, but I think it's Mr. Sims' question.
Whoa. You're on Ms. Barbie's time.
I can't get off her time, I'm sorry. Well, as it relates to wages, so one of the things I think there was a little bit of confusion, even me sitting here, our goal is not to keep wages flat. There's a cost of living increase, there's merit increases, there's an assessment period. We pay for performance. That's our culture.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we be very clear that we would be not doing a service to the community or to the city if we weren't paying fair wages in a fair market. To your point, there's salaries that $10.94 is just the bottom where I got to be very candid. This was fantastic that we even able to get that because some cities and some of our municipalities want to stay at minimum wage and you can't live off of that. It is impossible. So, but I think to clarify, one of the big focuses that Spectra brings, you look at your current staffing levels. Once we get named the partner and everything's approved, our team comes down to really do an assessment. We want to keep everybody who wants to be with us. But there's also populations from my short assessment that we're not targeting. Seniors, people who want flexibility and part-time work because they may have other jobs and need to supplement their income. When you look at communities like this that I grew up in a different city but are from, you have to not stay with just one model because it's not long-term sustainable. So we have to look at seniors, students, single parents who may have a job at this time but need to augment their salary, but a company may only offer full-time work and they can't because they have another job that augments their salary in a different way. So we're going to take a whole look at the marketplace, and if you think about with growth and new business comes new jobs and new opportunity. So the staffing level that exists today is not what it will look like in 6, 12, 24 months because we're going to continue to add back into the marketplace with the folks who are from the community to help continue to grow them and us. I don't know if that answered the question.
Well, that's a big help because I think it's really important that whatever we do in Fair Park helps the surrounding community because all you have to do is drive around. You see all these vacant lots. Somehow, some way, these little single-family homes are no longer there. And the community has been really hurt by a lot of policies in the past. So we have to look at them too. They're just as important as the historic buildings in the park as far as I'm concerned.
It's a great point, and how we can do more training, more development, more on-the-job training, because sometimes a job may not be a career. It may be a job for this point in time.
Yeah.
So how do we create, we have a saying in Spectra, we want to grow you personally and professionally. If I can teach you some skills that may be transferable in the next 12, 24 months, that makes us all better.
Yeah.
I'm out of my time.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Collins.
Thank you all. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you all, members of different organizations. You share our commitment to making Fair Park the beacon that it once was. We all want to bring it back to, and we see the potential, and we're optimistic about some of your plans. I wanted to ask about the marketing. We talked about some facility improvements that are obviously going to be needed. We just passed a $50 million bond package for Fair Park and improvements. A lot of that's just refurbishment. That's not down the road capital enhancements. But specifically talking about the Cotton Bowl, maybe one of the Peters, you all can address this. But Dallas-Fort Worth is very competitive in terms of sporting events. We have multiple venues that can attract the top talent athletically, entertainment-wise. So how can you market the Cotton Bowl and the other venues? You talked about, Peter Zingoni, that was one of Spectra's key highlights, is that you have those relationships with Live Nation, AEG, and other professional sports associations. But it's a very competitive landscape. And you already have the Dos Equis Starplex Pavilion on the same property. So how do you intend to market the Cotton Bowl and some of the other venues differently so that people will want to come to those venues that they haven't come in the past?
No, it's excellent to identify the actual reality of sitting in such a competitive landscape that we do here in the Metroplex. I think what the relationships that we'll bring to the table is identifying the spaces and the size of the types of events that we're going to focus on that don't compete directly with AT&T Center up the street, that don't compete directly with Dos Equis Pavilion, with Live Nation. A perfect example is that is at the Bandshell, for instance. It's a different size. It's going to be a different act. It's going to be a different artist. Therefore, it's going to be a different cost in ways that we can maximize the marketing initiatives through that. The difference that you will see, probably the most significant difference, is the way that we go after these events. We have our vice president of booking that's based out of Philadelphia, and we actually have a regional person as well that focuses solely on identifying the types of events that are touring that we can put in multiple Spectra venues. So, for example, if there's an artist that's going out that we would go and attract and get, that artist, I'm throwing just completely examples out for numbers, might cost $500,000. But because of the Spectra leverage that we're bringing in the multitude of facilities that we run, we can guarantee or at least negotiate putting that one event in 10 of Spectra facilities. Therefore, our purchasing power gets little, so that $500,000 ask just dropped down to a $450,000, which is a $50,000 savings, which give us the ability to take that $50,000, for instance, and put it to different ways to maximize the event, through marketing, through food and beverage, through sponsorship. So we're going to look very creatively on identifying the events. And then really just touching back on the example that we focused on earlier is just really relying on us and self-generated events, tapping into our resources through Spectra and identifying other like facilities or comparable facilities that have had success generating their own events, and understanding what the business plan, how it was put forth, understanding the financials, understanding the operational components of that, and making sure that we're not reinventing a new event. We are simply picking up the phone and calling our marketing professional in Des Moines, who had a extremely successful rodeo show at a similar stadium, and say, hey, let's talk. Let's figure out what the business plan was, figure out the marketing initiatives, how we partnered. So we're not trying to reinvent that. And that's something our head of marketing, who's Bob Schwartz, our senior vice president of marketing, really puts a big emphasis to our marketers in the field. They hold biweekly marketing calls to just making sure that we are sharing best practices through event generation.
So go ahead, Peter.
To add on, a little redundant, relationships and tenacity. I go back to my experiences in University of Phoenix. There were two long-term stadiums in Phoenix. Arizona State, where all the great concerts used to go before Chase Field, the home of the Diamondbacks, was built. And then we were the third one to the party, and we weren't even in the city. We were 30 miles outside the city. Literally, the first question I got asked by all of the industry people is, really? your big promise is you're going to do all these events, and written into our management agreement at that time was a goal of 100 events. Well, you heard me say we averaged for 10 years 125 events and 175 event days. One of my first calls was to the folks that control and present Supercross and Monster Jam, monster trucks. There were promises made, promises not kept, but I will tell you, they stayed at Chase Field and they renewed their contract for about 8 years. Well, I finally got them in the 9th year. We never forgot. I never forgot. I don't forget things like that. And we went after it, and they ultimately did much better by moving their event from downtown Phoenix. They were a little concerned, would people go out to Glendale? Well, we convinced them that we would help them on the marketing side, we would help them on the operational side, and that they were going to make more money in our building. Now, yes, I do realize I'm looking at you and talking about the Cotton Bowl versus, maybe Jerry's World, and so on and so forth. But, money talks. And we have a very strong relationship with that organization. I'm not making a promise, but again, I'm talking to you about how it works. I was tenacious. We as an organization are very tenacious. I look at international soccer, ICC. I was recently in Dallas. The Cotton Bowl looks like it's a magnificent facility for soccer, not just international soccer, but soccer in general. So we'll be beating the bushes on that as well. And again, using our marketing expertise in an effort to try and make whatever we're able to pull in as successful as possible. As part of our pro forma, we're going to have a marketing department and a director of marketing, and I would say off the top of my head, assistant director of marketing, as I've seen our pro forma. So we're going to add a department that's going to be working directly with the sales team and myself to really enhance those types of events.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Ms. Woods.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us, and I'm glad to know that this is a possible adventure for South Dallas. I live in that community. I share the same zip code as the Fair Park, so I get to see firsthand what this can do and what this will do for South Dallas and Fair Park. And to Ms. Barbie's statement about traveling to each corner and seeing people out on the streets, you do see that. However, this can bring some opportunity into the neighborhood. This can bring some revitalization, which is really needed in that neighborhood. But I did have one concern about one thing, the Fair Park First Board. I do believe you all need to have at least one person, two preferably, on that board that represent someone from that community. It's like me crying out from the wilderness. Someone needs to speak up and speak loudly about what happens at Fair Park, because it will affect myself and all of those of us who are taxpayers as well as renters in that neighborhood. So will you be adding someone soon?
We will.
Okay. I'll take that.
Yeah, now that we have the opportunity to talk and have some conversations, we've had some names, but we wanted to have some in-depth conversations. And even through this process, we've had some conversations with some local officials, so we'll be adding someone from that neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Did you say not local officials? Add some people, some regular folks who live in the neighborhood.
No, I said we had conversations.
Oh, okay. Mr. Toynes.
Good afternoon, y'all. I'll be quick. I just want to talk about a few things, and it's mostly towards Spectra. District 7 is made up of mostly African American and Hispanics, people of color. So we got 48% African American roughly and 38% Hispanics living in that district. Lincoln High School is one of the high schools that you all said you want to target, Lincoln and Madison, which are roughly both above 75% Hispanic. Few things I want to ask going in, I'm prefacing my question. Has Spectra ever participated in any anti-bias trainings as an organization to be able to come work in a community like this and be understanding of the people who live there? That's one. Also, I think it's going to be very important. We talk about community a lot and interacting and engaging with the community, learning that history of that community. I'm from Oak Cliff. I say that. I mean, I'm very biased towards my community, but my roots of my grandfather are in South Dallas, and it's a community that I care about a lot. And it's a lot of things that have come from there that have changed our city. So I think it's really important if you guys, and I know you will, but overkill on it and really understanding and learning that community, and also going back to the schools. Lincoln and Madison are basically walking distance from from Fair Park. But there are a lot of other high schools in the southern sector of the city and throughout the city as a whole that depend and want to work with and be in Fair Park. I think it's going to be important, not taking anything away from Lincoln and Madison, but looking at other schools like Skyline High School, South Oak Cliff High School, Carter, Kimball, these other schools within the city as well, and having some good outreach efforts there, and being able to bring those communities on board too, because it's going to take the collectivism of all of our communities to come together to move forward.
Yeah, I can take, let me try and unpack that and take the first question around training. Part of our onboarding for new managers and new employees is training that's geared towards appreciating differences. We try and teach people when you talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of us sitting in this room don't really understand it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I try to explain it to folks, and our team tries to help people understand diversity is being asked to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance, to actually be included. So we try to focus a lot on our team and also we want to make sure our employee base is representative of where we work. So that's some targets that we set internally to try to maximize the opportunity to make sure that we're giving back. As far as some of the high schools, those were some examples. In our budget, we're planning to have someone who will be focused on community works, community engagement. Because of the significance, we identified that early on that this is some place where you really have to be, when you make an outreach, you have to walk the walk and live the talk. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to commit and give back. So I think for us, some of us in HR who do this for a living, I mean, this is super exciting. This is super exciting because you guys are going to be in the forefront of how we can shape Spectra and shape other cities. This is going to be a training and development ground, and there's a lot of eyes wide open. Our CEO, literally, I was here last week, and when I was getting on the elevator, first thing he wants to know is, how's it going? You guys ready for the Fair Park presentation? This is huge for us as a company. So it's not just those in this room. People back home are really committed to doing what it takes to make this successful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Toynes. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. We really appreciate all your energy and effort and to get where we are today and all your ideas and thoughts. I've had several conversations with Mr. O'Connor. What y'all want to do is wonderful. It doesn't work without money. And when I look at the numbers here, if you don't hit fundraising goals, this is to Mr. James, if you don't hit fundraising goals, I don't see that we're getting a park. I don't see that we're going to get any contracts to hire any minority businesses. We're not going to have anything. And I appreciate the talents on the board. When I look at the board of the Arboretum and the zoo and the Clyde Warren Park, they have some people who are very experienced in raising a lot of money on a consistent basis. And I'm worried that we don't have that here because one of my concerns is if you don't raise that money, it's a long time before we can do something different with the park. Because I think you get your plan is to raise $3 million the first year, but we don't get a second look or have any discussions until after 2 years. And then there's the concept of the remediation plan. So I am very concerned about that we don't have hard financial obligations to raise money to make this thing work. Because, and I'd like you to address that.
All right, we have to raise $3 million per year. You get quarterly reports the first 2 years, so it's not you don't wait after a year to get to the end of the second calendar year before you get another opportunity to see what our track record is.
I understand you're going to be telling us as you come along, but we can't sit down and say, hey, you've missed it, we've got to come up with plan B. until you've been trying for 2 years.
Well, the other thing I was going to mention is we have in our budget to bring on a development officer. As we talked about earlier, the agreement to date stated 9 board members. That doesn't say that it caps at 9 board members. It has to say it's a minimum. Our intent is now that we've gone through this first phase, is to start to look for additional board members as well as that have the financial capacity to do fundraising and to have that strength. Valletta's got some experience doing that, but we also have some other individuals that we've targeted and that we've had some preliminary discussions. We have not brought them onto the board yet. That is the intent now that we got through today.
You know, the Clyde Warren Park people have come to talk to us, and, you know, they're a fraction of your size. You know, they're a postage stamp compared to what you are. But they have to raise $4 million a year just to run that bridge over. And so, again, I have that concern.
The other thing is we've got a much more massive kind of, I don't want to say fragmented park, but there's so many moving parts. We wanted to make sure that we have some technical expertise. So the board as composed today takes care of some defined needs that were part of the agreement, as well as some of the things that we initially saw. We realized that we need to bring some fundraising capacity to the board. We're looking at an advisory committee. I actually sat on the Dallas Arboretum board, so I understand the mechanism and I understand what our charge is. I sit here today unfazed. I believe that we're going to do what we say we're going to do.
I appreciate it. My next question is for the Spectrum people. I appreciate your experiences as you shared with us about Sacramento and Boise and Fayetteville, North Carolina. And as my colleague, Ms. Collins, pointed out, I think we're in a very different market from what they are. And I'd like you to tell me what you think the differences are in those markets, and what do you think is going to be unique about Fair Park that you're going to have to address to market it? Not the similarities, but the unique challenges that you face.
Sure. I think the challenges I think we've laid out, we have a lot of competitive, we have a competitive landscape that we sit in here. You know, everything from the stadiums, from the arenas. I think it's the partnerships that are going to be key for us. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very strong relationship with Visit Dallas as well, to really focusing on a lot of those sports commission-like events. That's going to help focus on a lot of economic development and economic impact. So we're going to take a look and identify the events from a very financially effective approach, making sure that we are not only just driving the events to the park for the benefit of the P&L of Fair Park, but also the surrounding communities, that we're offering job opportunities as well. I think as we identify the challenges that we're going to need to face, I think there's no hiding the fact of some of the deferred maintenance. We're competing with a couple shiny new buildings, to be quite frank. And we are, I think, again, by bringing in the relationships that we have, can focus on that.
Anticipate with those challenges on the deferred maintenance that you will come back to us for capital money? But, again, a concern I would have, you'd come back to us in 2 years and say, hey, you know, we've really tried and we've worked hard, but city, you're going to have to put another $100 million in this for us to be competitive.
Go ahead.
I think what we're showing in terms of our performance is as is. We're not saying that no additional investment is needed. It's very clear, as we mentioned before, there's been a report done, several of them, that we've reviewed. We think there's a good basis behind that. We want to do our own assessment. There will be need for additional capital funds to support Fair Park, but we can stand with our operating performance as it's laid out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Ms. Dickey. Oh, did you turn your mic off? Okay, someone has to turn theirs off so that Mr. Dickey can go live. So, Mr. Sims, if you want to turn.
I'm up next. So.
No, we still have round one. You're not. So, Miss Rader, can you go off and come back on? Okay, no, you're back.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're still.
The construction threshold amount of $250,000 is pegged to the consumer price index, so there's some indexing there for any increase due to inflation. But to touch on the concerns raised by a couple of my fellow park board members, when it comes to wages, the Fair Park living wage will be no increase for 20 years under the term on that. And that gave me a little bit of indigestion when I read it, and I do understand that we're not here to modify terms of the contract, but there is a point of information I wanted to bring up. There is a national standard for livable minimum wage, which is basically there's one for Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington. They do it for major metropolitan areas. It's the Glassmeyer MIT standard, and for Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, that amount is considered to be $11.10, and the Fair Park minimum wage is 16 cents less than that. And they define that as like the absolute minimum, doesn't account for any entertainment, no eating in any restaurants, no retirement planning, no saving for a down payment. And they say it's the minimum income standard that, if met, draws a very fine line between the financial independence of the working poor and the need to seek out public assistance just to avoid housing insecurity and food insecurity. When I raised this, because I brought this up earlier with Ryan, and I asked about that, and I'd just like to share the information he shared with me, which was that is not a Spectra number, that is imposed by the city of Dallas, which I was so surprised to hear that, given that poverty's up 43% in this city in the last 15 years. Income disparity is noted. And I just wonder if I could ask you, sir, if Mr. O'Connor, if you could just explain what you explained to me so that everybody understands where that number comes from.
I believe I see in the back that Elizabeth Rachar, the city's chief financial officer, would like to address that question.
A few years ago, the City Council passed a resolution that tied our minimum wage for contracts to the MIT Living Wage Index for Dallas County. So the 1094 is the living wage that was in place at the time we went out with the RFP. And so that stays in place for the contract. It doesn't limit them, of course, from paying market wages or anything above that. It is just the minimum wage that we put into every contract issued during that time period. Beginning October 1, the living wage will be $11.15 for this area, and all of our contracts will require that starting October 1.
Okay, so in case would that mean that our folks might be getting a raise before the contract comes in, or would that be up to Spectra to do that?
After the contract is signed, it's up to Spectra. Our requirement is simply what was in place by MIT Living Wage Index at the time we went into the contracting process.
Would it be inappropriate for me to ask the Spectra people if they might be willing to consider going with the new standard instead of the old standard?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the...
That's a question I'd like to ask, but I'm not sure if under our inability to... Well, I guess this wouldn't be anything changing the contract. It's just asking for their openness to the possibility of indexing.
I think he's ready to answer you.
I think the 1094 was the minimum. So whatever the greater is, so if the greater is 1115, we would honor the 1115.
Oh, and just a quick question: was the no raise for 20 years? Is that a City of Dallas thing as well? That in no contracts do we allow for a cost of living increase in these long-term contracts?
Yes, for the term of the contracts that we let, we require it to be at the rate that it was at the time we started the contracting process. Many of our contracts are 3-year contracts, 5-year contracts. We have very few that are 20-year contracts, but that is our standard process.
Okay, because I've seen a lot of 20 and even 30-year contracts on my short time on the board, and to not have any allowance, but that's a whole City Council matter. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. I'm going to close out round one. First and foremost, I totally agree with Ms. Woods. Mr. James, the cat is now out of the bag, so I would say that you reach out to everyone at Fair Park, not just the resident institutions, but the neighborhood. This is going to take not just meeting on these Thursdays. The onus is now on you all. The guys from Spectra, Fair Park First, get out there and talk to folks. I feel like this got released last Friday, and I don't know if you guys were kind of quiet because you wanted to come talk to us first, but I am telling you now, we need people to know about this plan. I'm not going to go through the whole history of Fair Park in South Dallas. We all know what it is. We need to communicate. So I think that we need to have some sort of advisory board that lives in that neighborhood or whatever you all determine, taking into account Ms. Wood's comments as well. Second thing, when I know the Spectre guy said they'll be available whenever we need them. Mr. Biederman, are you going to plan on being here for our follow-up meetings?
Don't know the schedule yet. I'll try to be at as many as I can. I'm the president of the company. I have deputies who are being brought into the job now that it looks like we're going to do it. So you'll see other people also.
So I've got a few questions for you. I wore my green tie because I want to remember every time I look down that we're going to put the park back into Fair Park.
I wore my green. Just for the record.
So every time I look down, now here's my worry. We haven't talked a lot about this park. I'm assuming you know the 2003 master plan pretty well. So I'm guessing, do you think it's going to go where the museum green went there? I mean, I think we all kind of understand it'll go in front of the science place, those parking lots. Is that your understanding?
You're asking about the neighborhood park?
Yeah.
Too early to say. I think, and I really hate to get it wrong in a public forum.
Yeah.
I will say this. I think there should be two prime considerations for the neighborhood park placement. One, ease of access for the neighborhood. But two, the proper relationship to everything else that's going on in Fair Park so that you can really gin up a lot of activities there and they're well placed versus the event or building things that Mr. Slaughter talked about. So I would hate to pick it right now, but we're starting thinking about it right away.
When would you anticipate breaking ground on the neighborhood park?
We had said in a meeting yesterday with the Parks Department representatives, will plans for that be approved fairly quickly? We've been impressed with how things moved at Clyde Warren, for example. So if those move, there's no reason not to experiment with some programming activities, I would think next summer, which does not have a lot of construction, obviously, as part of that, towards an opening of serious neighborhood programming the year after that, maybe the spring of 2020.
Okay, but see, I want to.
That's just a guess.
I want to focus on the green, right? So the green we talked about going from gray infrastructure to green infrastructure. That kind of goes back to the capital improvement questions Mr. Sims asked and Mr. Stewart asked. What is y'all's impression on how much that's going to cost? Are you anticipating bond dollars? Are you anticipating private fundraising? I think we need to know what we need to plan for.
Can't answer those questions today. If you ask me when I might be able to answer them, if you guys give us the go-ahead, October, November. It sounds like you're on a schedule for September, and then we have the council.
Yeah.
I think we'd be giving, my prediction is we'd be giving more definitive answers to those questions early in 2019, but not before, because it's going to take some study.
Because right now, the way the contract reads, one, there are no performance indicators. There's a performance plan to be determined later, but there's none right now, right? How long do you all, and this is, I guess, for everyone involved, how long do you anticipate it would take to put together a performance plan? Do you guys get what I'm talking about? In the contract, it says that you have to meet certain performance metrics, but those aren't laid out. It says those will be determined at a later time. So we don't, because I've been asked, how many more events, how many more people, how much more green space?
I can talk in general if that's helpful. The key performance indicator for any park is attendance.
Yeah.
And from attendance comes a lot of good things, like sponsorships, added money from outside, people desiring to be part of the scene, so they bring activities in for events.
But how long do you think? How long does it take for you all to put a pencil to it? And it doesn't have to be exact, but when people ask me how many more events are we going to get, I'd like to give. Well, here's what the performance measure. Here's what they're required to meet. I mean, we've been you guys have been working on this 2 years.
Sure,
I'm sure
no.
you got some sort of idea.
Yeah, and you know, typically from a booking perspective, we see anything as short as 6 months all the way to 18 months is kind of your typical booking cycle in our industry. From concerts, festivals, it's going to take time to execute the contracts as well as market them, make sure that we're giving the appropriate amount of time.
But you have
plan.
You have a built-in revenue increase, right? For you to hit that number, you have to have a built-in attendance increase, right? So can we start doing that now? So as this process, I can't.
Yeah.
And I get Spectra. You guys are Class A on what you do. Mr. Biederman, you're Class A. Everyone's Class A, first class, everything. I just want to make sure that we flesh out some of these things. My big concerns right now are greening up the park, how that's going to be paid for, when it's going to happen. The comprehensive plan is beautiful, so I want to figure out how we do that. I also want to figure out kind of this relationship with the board and this and that. But I think that there's opportunity between now and September to do some of these things. I don't like to say, well, we'll wait till the council approves it, then we'll do this, then we'll do that. You guys got the blue ribbon, so
Understand.
Start now. Okay, Mr. Schlosser.
Yes, thanks. 3 things within 6 minutes. First,
I kept my time. I didn't go over.
Yeah, you did a good job, Bobby. First is help us understand. I'm not sure if I'm directing this to Spectra or to the nonprofit. What happens if the fees the city is contractually committed to pay do not cover your expenses? Is the nonprofit on the hook? Does the contract between the nonprofit and Spectra mean that Spectra covers the delta since they have most of the expenses? So that's one. 2 is, can you describe for us the relationship that you imagine with the state fair? I think that's good preparation for you as you think about the community's reaction in the coming days, weeks, and months. And the third is, I think that what you're hearing from this group, and certainly I'll speak for myself, is not any doubt about the credentials, about the track record. That's impeccable. That's what makes the city comfortable with the selection. But that the competitive set here, meaning, as you know, we're in the number 1 or number 2 or number 3 fastest growing regional economy in the country. And the number of venues that have opened in the last 36 months is really unprecedented, right? In Irving, in Allen, in Plano, it's just remarkable. That despite your contacts, or in fact, with your contacts and with your synergy, it will still be a challenge to achieve the kind of event traffic that I think our staff has done a good job on, but that you'll need to put on steroids. Those are the 3 questions then, right? So you got them all. One is revenue, deltas on the expense.
Right.
2 is fair park, state fair relationship, and 3 is competitive pressures.
Okay, I'll start with the delta on the revenue. So our
Or the expenses, actually, go either way.
Well, it was built very conservatively, so we think that there is some room for growth in that. We actually think that we'll exceed those expectations.
What happens when it doesn't happen? What happens when, regardless of revenue being low or expenses being high, what happens?
What we do is, that's our part as the management. We're supposed to look and make sure that we're hitting those targets. So on a monthly basis, we're sitting down with Peter, not this Peter, that Peter, to make sure that we're on track and that we're managing those expenses.
Does the nonprofit have ultimate financial responsibility, or does that default to the management company?
We are the manager, they are the operator. So we're ultimately contracted with the city of Dallas.
And in all fairness, this is not a criticism because I'm an advocate, but the nonprofit has no assets.
That is correct.
So if the nonprofit were not able to honor its contractual obligations to the city, a bankruptcy would be ugly, but there's really no deep pockets because the operator has the deep pockets and they are not financially on the hook.
Their contract mirrors our contract with the city, so there'll be.
Is it co-liable? Is the operator taking on the same responsibilities as the nonprofit?
I'd have to defer to my legal counsel for
let's
that.
ask the Spectra folks. We'll ask the lawyer.
If I could, that's a great question. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. Number one is, if the annual appropriation is not sufficient to cover the delta, the expenses, the city is not on the hook. The city has no obligation to put more money into the project, into the operation, than the annual appropriation. So, one, I'd like to make that clear.
That's important to go on the record. That's really important.
Yes. You'll find that in the management
contract.
contract.
What would happen in that situation? Because this has happened with other partners.
Well, Spectra, as the subcontracted manager, has an obligation to try to balance the budget. It will have to ensure it hits its targets. If there are expenses it will need to cut in order to ensure that it's not spending more than it's generating, you'll have an obligation to do that.
Okay. Important comments that we will live for infamy in what you just
And
said.
they're written right in the contract. So
good. That's even better.
I'm not just standing here saying this.
Right,
This is all supported by the contract document. And I would just like to add, there is an obligation that the city imposed upon on the manager, which is being passed down to Spectra, to obtain a bond, a performance bond in excess of $4 million. So that is kind of the security that stands behind Spectra's obligation to the manager, the nonprofit, and the nonprofit's obligation to the city.
Great. Very encouraging to hear this. Other ones?
So the state fair commitment, how do we plan on working? Well, conversations have been happening throughout the process of the RFQ, sitting down and working with them. We feel very confident we will have a great working relationship with Mitchell and his team. We're committed to having a great working relationship. I think, obviously, with the situation we're in of them assigning the contract to us and agreeing to that, I think it's going to take some follow-up meetings with not only Mitchell and his executive team, but also the board of directors at the state fair. We are in discussions to hopefully get something on the books in the very, very near future.
Can you give us the
address
commitment that there would be no intention to ask the state fair, and by the way, I'm not offering an opinion, I'm asking for information, to either change its footprint or its 90-day time frame, or are those open to discussion?
I think we are going to need to know a little bit more about the footprint, to be completely honest. I think we're going to need to know about some of the obligations. I think it's too premature to discuss without, it wouldn't be fair for me to say one way or the other today without truly understanding and seeing an operation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's TBD.
Yes, it is. And,
Okay.
and those meetings are looking to get scheduled quickly.
Okay, final item, competitive pressures. I'm sure you've done a competitive assessment, but it's an incredibly competitive marketplace.
Yeah. We're going to roll up our sleeves.
I got it.
We're going to fight. We're fighting. We're representing Fair Park, and we have a proven track record of performing in a lot of competitive markets, and it takes hard work, and it's going to take some grit, and we are looking to bring each and every little piece of that to the table.
Great, thank you. I'm going to have to exit, so thank you very much for the
Sorry.
and more importantly for the effort.
Sorry, guys, for, again, harping on the mics, but there are people saying they can't hear you, so pull them closer, talk louder, whatever you got to do. I've already asked them, they can't turn them up. Just talk like you're singing in the shower. Ms. Williams, next round.
I just have a couple of quick follow-up questions because most of them have already been addressed. I think I tried to look at it on page 184, and I think the annual staff salary, are we at $3.7 million? That's last year. Is that 3.7 for the Fair Park? I'm sorry. They had a stamp. They had the stamp stamped across it, so I couldn't make it out. It's on page 184. If some Willis would have to confirm 184 under the Comcast, it's just stamped with the confidential, so I couldn't make out. Is that 3.7 total just for the staff at the Fair Park?
So
Page
our staff,
184.
we're budgeted for 70 staff positions. That budget came about 2 years ago when the City Council increased our budget for the previous contract with the Fair Park Texas Foundation. However, we did not fill those 70 positions, so we're about 55 right now, filled positions.
The dollar amount.
Oh.
Okay, I'll go to the next. I think I kind of tried to make it out as like at 3.7.
I think you're talking about on their pro forma?
No, this is ours. This is what's provided to us here.
That's their pro forma. Yeah, that's now $4.13 million.
Not that one. Let me show you. Go to page 184.
I know, Ms. Williams. There's a revised version in tab. I think I ripped mine out, but I think it was tab 3 or 4. It looks like this.
I think it's the very last piece of paper in the notebook.
Yeah, and the number is $4.13 million.
So where are we at now? Just right now, what does it cost for staff to?
According to this document, fiscal year 15-16 was 3.5.
Okay, So my question is, where did the increase come? Because if we're gonna save money, if we're supposed to be saving money, and I don't know where it's at, I saw a tab and I tried to physically count because I think the groundkeeper, that's not what they call them, that's $25,000 a year, and they're going to have maybe 5 or 8. So I tried to physically count the personnel. So my math is, if we're saving money, how do we increase? If right now we're at 3.7, so, and I think the anticipated budget was 55, they have 4.5 million. So where did the numbers come from?
I think it's a really simple answer. If you look at that number, we've assumed that...
Guys, could you speak
I'm
up?
sorry.
Yeah.
We have assumed that the number that you see in that 15-16 column has accelerated for 2 years. So we've accounted for what should be salary increases, cost of living increases, all the things that Marcel brought up into our budget. So we valued forward 2 years.
So how many number of staff did y'all include in that?
I want to say that that number is 65.
65. So we're budgeted for how many? 72?
Well, our budget is 70.
Okay.
But we've never filled up to that level because there is a contract pending that we would be turning over to a private operator.
Okay, and can someone on page 25 of the briefing, I understand that he clarified that, but I guess just for me, where it says the manager can request additional appropriation, but he said they might not need it, and we're not obligated. And my last point I want to make, and I'm going to keep stressing this because we serve on the board, and I'll be naive to think that it's not going to take money to do this project. And I've been around a long time, and unfortunately I watch too much politics, too much news, I can pretty well quote everyone. I'm just a little concerned, and like I said, Spectra, they have everything that it takes to deliver. But we serve on the board, and I'm not picking on you, Mr. James, but I'm just a little concerned, and I hope, like my colleague said, between now and the time we vote, that you all can bring me some hard, heavy hitters. I know Ms. Lill, she advocates for the Hall of State, but I need to see where this money, because I'm going to be honest, I've been on the board since 2014. There's a lot of partners who have came here in 30 years. Y'all said in 10 years you're going to raise $30 million. That's not acceptable for me because I'm not being unrealistic. We have partners who have raised over, I can say the trails. They wasn't even on our bond list, but they came up with $15 million. And I'm not saying you all need to come up with $15 million, but if we're going to hand this over, you all need to come and produce. I'm speaking for myself because Katy Trail, they came with 20, 40. Downtown Parks, 40 million. I'm not saying you have to have 40 million, but I cannot agree 10 years when I term off this board, y'all are just raising 30 million when y'all say y'all have the best proposal. I believe in Spectra, but when I'm looking at this, that's on the board responsibility. So between now and the time we vote, I will hope that you all can add some millennium because, I'm 49 and a half. And when I look at that board, I don't see, y'all say y'all want to be there forever. Even we have term limits. And that's a problem with me, not trying to get into your bylaws because we hear that all the time. Council stay on the seat too long. They dealing with that in Arlington. No term limits. So I would like to see some millennia on this board, and hopefully y'all can have term limits, whether it's 5, 10, 15, but a lifetime. The judges are the only one who have a lifetime appointment. And I'm just, being realistic.
Yes, ma'am, you are. All your points are taken.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Mr. Slaughter.
Yes. Once again, we can sit here and spend a prodigious amount of time, which I think we don't need to because we know what Spectra brings to the table. My concern is, of course, my esteemed colleagues, Rodney and Mr. Schlesinger, I'm concerned about, whenever everybody on this board, whenever we get a contract like we did to Rivershon, and Mr. Marino brought to me, he said, Bo, I know you need to see this. here's another 20-year deal. And you know how I feel about that. I don't want to get us caught up giving someone one of our assets for 20 years and we have no outlet. We can't do anything about it. I'm quite sure Spectra can do what they want to do. This board, thank God they have someone on their board that I really respect, which is John Proctor. And I'm kind of dismayed. This big of a venture that you guys are doing, and you said that you really didn't know what the footprint of the people that we already have out there, like the music hall and the state fair. I think that should have been real important before you went into a contract and knew what that footprint was. And then before we negotiated. That's what I'm concerned about. And I think we as a board, we need to be cohesive and vet this out. And there needs to be things done at the Fair Park. We all know that.
Mr. Slaughter,
yes,
I don't mean to
the
interrupt
question
you.
Is, the question
I want to say, let's focus on questions.
I know my president.
Let's focus on questions, and then last round we'll all give our thoughts and input.
I'm wondering, how did you I think Mr. Biederman said that, one of the Peters, that you really didn't know what the footprint of the State Fair and the other entities out there were when you were getting to, I mean, you've been doing this, what, for 2 years? So I'd like to know that.
Yeah, to clarify the comment, I believe what Mr. Schlosser was asking was really the ins and outs of the load in and load out. Just to understand, we certainly are well aware of the footprint of each and every tenant out there, understanding when they take over, starting yesterday with the State Fair. It was more just to clarify exactly what I was responding to. Understanding was just more of the move in and the move out relationship and how we can assist them and be helpful. We wanted to learn a little bit more of the operation.
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't mean to go back over this again, but I do want to figure this out. And so, Mr. O'Connor, can you assuage my concerns that this bid is so much lower than all the other ones simply because they removed the capital expenditures? Is that not the case? Or are you familiar with the other bids?
Page 18 is what he's talking about.
So there's a fundamental difference in the proposals. Two of the proposals were asking to contract to the expense budget. This proposal is asking to contract to the delta, the difference between the revenues and the expenses. And therefore, when you multiply that difference over a 10-year period, it's a pretty dramatic difference. And so I wanted to make that clear. That accounts for the significant difference in price between the three proposals.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Okay. If you look at this slide, you'll see $191 million for Fair Park Conservancy. That is the cost to operate the park according to their proposal over a 10-year period. Fair Park Texas Foundation is
Ryan,
$182
talk
million.
into your mic.
Sorry. Fair Park Texas Foundation is $182 million.
Louder, closer, louder. Seriously. We got to get everyone to hear this stuff.
Sure. Fair Park Conservancy, cost to operate the park over a 10-year period, $191 million. Fair Park Texas Foundation, cost to operate the park over a 10-year period, $182 million. They wanted to contract at that amount. They wanted to contract to their expense budget, right?
Right.
Fair Park First, on the other hand, wants to contract to the difference between the cost of operating the park and the revenues that they're going to bring in. That accounts. It's an apples and oranges proposition here. It's a fundamentally different proposal. Fair Park First is just seeking the delta, the difference between the operating expenses and the revenue. They are proposing to keep those revenues and use them to operate the park. It's a fundamental difference between the three proposals.
Okay. It would have been beneficial, I think, had we been apples to apples. So that,
Can I just make a quick statement that I think makes it simpler in what he said? From what I can tell, they are taking on the risk, right?
That's a good way to say it.
Okay, so the other two didn't want to risk it, so they asked for the full operating. These guys are saying we're willing to bear the risk if we don't meet our numbers.
They are a professional operator. They're comfortable with
No.
numbers.
I get their resume's good. Right. They are saying we're going to raise the revenue, and this will be the change. And the other guy said, this is how much it costs to run the park. This is how much we want, right?
You're right.
Okay.
I wanted to talk to Mr. Biederman. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being a part of this, actually. I know that your resume precedes you. I know all the wonderful things you did at Bryant Park, but also with Clyde Warren Park, because we were around back then and are very appreciative of you being here and doing this. So your organization, your business organization, Biederman Redevelopment Ventures, is going to do the park plan and the update of the master plan? Is that what's going to happen?
The neighborhood park plan and the update of the master plan, correct. And some other things. We never, usually the scope for what we do expands once we get involved. We see other things that have to be done, and we do those too.
All right. And so, but your organization, you're not doing that for free, are you?
No. We will also receive a fee like Spectra would.
All right. So you're on the board of this foundation that's going to be hiring your business to do this. Do you see that as a conflict?
We first, obviously, anything that's a business arrangement involving us, we would recuse ourselves from consideration of that at the board. I was not planning to be on the board. It was requested that it be on. I'd be happy not to be and just be a worker on the project. But evidently the feeling was we should also be on the board. But obviously we would recuse ourselves if any business arrangements became a subject of discussion.
Okay. So it says here, and this is totally separate here. I'm going to jump around. I do apologize. That first, Fair Park First and Spectra will provide capital planning and prioritization through the 5-year capital plan submitted yearly to the city, and implement all capital bond improvements funded in any way other than city bond programs. How is this different than how we currently operate? And when we have this, the capital improvements list, is that who controls that capital improvement list? Who decides it? And does this board have any input into that? Does that come before this board for approval?
I can answer it from Spectra's perspective. Obviously, the city has issued, I think, upward of $50 million in bonds already. The city will manage that process. We hope to be involved in terms of offering opinions as well as prioritization. But in addition to that, any additional funds that we're able to raise privately will go back into capital projects, and we will manage that procurement process at the direction of Fair Park First Board.
And when you say we, you don't mean we, Spectra, raising private funds. You mean we, the foundation.
We, the foundation, sorry. Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. I did want to talk about the performance indicators. If I only have about 30 seconds, I'll go ahead and yield my time. I'll come in the next round.